and welcome back to Housing Data Talks. This is our 5th episode, and I'm joined today by Amanda Leonard, who is the Associate External Affairs Director and also is our Editor-in-Chief for Pulse, so you would have seen lots of her words when we've released our Pulse reports. She's here to talk to us today about what's been happening in the last 12 months, also predictions for the future. Again, I'm also joined by John Wickington, who we've all seen a few times before. He's my line manager. That's not the reason why he's still on these. But he'll be talking to us about the data, what's going on, what he's seen, the insights, the trends, and we might even cover a little bit of politics, as well as the nuance behind what's going on. John, we're sort of just over the new year now in regards to the new financial year. And I'm just curious on what your thoughts were with the data that showed us for the last 12 months. What's it shown us happening in the sector? Any insights, any trends that we expected or didn't expect to see?
I don't think there's anything I wasn't expecting, but we are seeing a kind of gradual improvement. I think that the way that regulation has gone, certainly in England, is really sort of edging landlords in the right direction in terms of improved relationships with residents and tenants, as well as getting their services better so that they serve their communities and end up with sort of better outcomes for all parties.
How about you, Amanda? Same sort of question?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with John that we're starting to see that kind of steady, incremental, almost borderline boring increases in areas like satisfaction. I mean, the idea that almost 3/4 have improved their satisfaction this year, I think it's something like 71%, isn't it, John? Have improved their satisfaction this year. That still does beg the question that a third of the sector this far into regulation is not moving forward, for example, with satisfaction. And I think the exciting bit, which Housemarque are really, really good at, is getting underneath those steady incremental improvements, because I think we are starting to see what's behind that steady systemic improvement that we know is essential to kind of sustain improvement. So, yeah.
I think something that's really interesting that I've seen in the figures that we've just collected for TSMs is how repairs, the satisfaction with repairs has increased the largest amount out of all of the measures that are in there, out of all the perception measures. It's gone up by about sort of 5.5% year on year. That's just the sort of the average figure across the sector, but it's more than the overall satisfaction figure. So we're sort of hoping that you could see that as a sort of lead indicator into repairs has the biggest effect on overall satisfaction, and if landlords get their repairs service right, it's the biggest touch point that they have with tenants throughout the year, that it can sort of make their perception of their landlord improve, and it's kind of a sort of a bellwether for the overall performance of the landlord and the sector as a whole.
No, it's an interesting one as well. I think with the fact that the costs of repairs have gone up so dramatically as well that we've seen recently. I mean, everything that's happening in the global economy has affected that. But it makes you wonder, and as you say, repairs is such a touch point with tenants. Does it all have a crossover? Is it not just because things are costing more, but are they actually putting more money into it with the repairs? Is that why satisfaction's getting better? Are they working in a better way?
I think it's probably more on the sort of the human interaction side. So when we used to collect star data, I think it's still a measure in Wales. There was the ease of contacting your landlord, and that had the biggest impact on overall satisfaction. So it's how the landlord interacts with the tenant, how it has the right channels of communication, how it understands the journey that a tenant must go through when they are reporting a repair, and getting all those individual touch points right from where the repair is reported to it being completed and the work made good and dusted off or whatever at the end of the repair. I think getting all of those small bits right is contributing to the overall figure. I think the reason that repairs have gone up is partly because they're just doing more of them. So we look at the average number of repairs across the year that we're collecting through Pulse, and we can see that that has increased. The average cost of a repair has not increased by the same extent. It's just that there's more throughput, there's more activity going on, and landlords are doing more. So probably from a tenant perspective, they sort of feel that if they report a repair now, they're more likely to get it done. So they have kind of belief in the system, and that's contributing overall to this general incremental rise in satisfaction.
And I think it's also that combination of people starting now to look at end-to-end tenant journey mapping. So I think landlords are really starting to look at service delivery slightly more holistically. And I know in Monthly Pulse this month you've done a spotlight on looking at service design, and I think people are starting to step back and not just react to repairs, but actually think really systemically about how to improve the end-to-end system. And I think now we know that takes time, John, don't we? There's a lag, I think, of about 18 months between that kind of transactional satisfaction improvement and overall sentiment. But I do think we're starting to see people who are taking that more holistic approach performing better. And how smart data does show that, I think.
Do you both think that some of you mentioned regulations, both of you, that have come in, and obviously we've had Awaab's law coming in, and there's been slight changes to consumer gradings. We've seen the different ways in which they're looking at the consumer gradings, and then we've got more coming in. Do you think those have had an impact on what we've seen and what's going to be happening as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I think consumer grading is obviously separate to the measurement of KPIs, and I think the regulator would certainly not want to see people like try and make direct links between, if you're doing well on this figure on your TSMs, you're going to get a top grading. But the framework in general of consumer standards, it is putting the right emphasis in the right places on the relationship between landlord and tenant, and that is having a positive impact. So things like the transparency standard, it's all about sort of ensuring that the tenant believes that they've got a good landlord and that they will get the service that they require from their landlord.
Yeah, and I think again, although you can't say, do A, B, and C and you'll get a C1, or don't do these things and you'll end up with a C3, C4. Although data and culture are probably the two really critical areas for focusing on the things that will get you a better regulatory grade. But I think, as John said, I think it's driving an ethos. I think it's driving a philosophy across the sector, and the regulators just published this week. Actually, they're about to do a piece of research on the impact that more proactive regulation is having. But one of the things we have seen at Housemarque is the characteristics of those C1, C2 organisations are quite different to organisations that are potentially struggling with that regulatory grade. We are starting to see, those characteristics separating the pack, and I think that's what the data's showing across a broad range of performance metrics as well. You've got, the median rates are kind of operating quite steadily and progressively improving, but those kind of huge variations of different landlords, I think we are starting to see now people get to grips with what it takes to be a good, solid, effective landlord.
No, that's a really interesting and good point you make there, and it's always good, isn't it, to see people kind of in that journey of improvement and that kind of change with how they're doing. And I think it's something that we're going to be touching on as well in the next sort of project that we've got going on. John, do you want to go into a bit more detail on that?
Yeah, so we're working with a group of housing associations, the Housing Futures Network, and Housemarque's part in it is developing the source material for it, but we're looking at how the sector can evolve over the next 10 years, what skills are going to be needed, what's going to be expected from landlords, and how that can be delivered, what expectations there are now, and then how those are going to change over the next 10 years. And I think it's going to be really interesting to present how housing associations, and they're the group that we're looking at for this particular exercise, how they're expected to perform so many different roles in terms of housing management, but also stepping into the shoes of other public agencies that just don't have the capacity to continue over that. What they need to do, their statutory services, they're just stretched too thin.
No, I had a really interesting conversation the other day about it, and also I guess looking at the links with what landlords do with the health sector and the public health. And there's been some, you perhaps don't think about it immediately, even people in the sector, but there's so much work that relies on, as you say, things like mental health teams, but also the physicalities and people living in their homes. Are the homes correct for them? Are they equipped right? Is there the money there to do the adaptations that they need? There's lots of things that the pressure's even higher now for people. And you can't discharge people from hospital when they haven't got the correct property to move into. But the conversation I was having the other day is someone had to live in the house before the adaptations could be done to suit their needs, but the house wasn't suitable for them to live in. Well, this is the
crazy,
sort of thing
yeah,
that's
absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
But I think what you're highlighting, Ali, is that kind of joined up holistic placemaking. You know, how communities how communities come together and focus on what's important. And we know, I mean, squeeze capacity is prevalent in the sector. You know, we're never going to go back to the kind of margins we had 8-10 years ago. You know, and I think that squeeze capacity in the sector, it's also a sector, as you said, John, through the work you're doing on that project, it's also a sector that's trying to also plug gaps in public services, and that's really challenging, isn't it? But actually, there probably is enough capacity in the system if we joined up a little bit more. And I think, you know, Housemarque, the insight that Housemarque can provide through that data, through those indicators, through those structural decisions that you can make to deliver more for less, I think is really, really critical. And we really need, so I'm really excited about this piece of work that you're involved in. I think the future of housing is going to look very different to how it looks today.
Yeah, and it's something that, you know, it's the learning from, as you say, the data that we've got, the past that we've seen for everything that's happening. And then the learning, we mentioned it, it's so reactive. I've worked on that front line, and you just don't have the time.
You used to do that job, didn't you?
Yeah, you don't have the time, and you've got that reactive. And I know that everyone would love to be more proactive and kind of sit there and go, let's have all the agencies together. Let's really get the stakeholders to say, look, this is what should happen. This is how it should happen. This is what tenants needs. But unfortunately, it seems to be there's a pinch point, or there's a point of poor service, and then everyone goes, no, like with Awaab's law when that came in and the reasons for it, it shouldn't have ever got to that point, but there's just not the capacity there. Is there anything that the data shows us, I suppose, about people kind of increasing headcount or how the specialisms work? I know we've briefly touched on it.
Yeah, so we are seeing more investment going into contact centres, so the staff that's on the kind of telephone front line, as it were, and we're hoping to see that reflected in the things like the average time that a tenant spends like waiting to get through, which has shot up. 10 years ago it was like 30 seconds to get through. Now it's the average is more like 300 seconds. So, you know, real differences there. But I think landlords are seeing that tenants need to have a variety of communications opportunities, channels to use to get through to the landlord, and in providing that they must invest in this as a frontline service as much as other areas of housing management where we're not seeing the same degree of investment going in. It seems that there's been it's been underinvestment. You know, there's been more of an emphasis on repairs and maintenance in recent years, and that has had a kind of salami slicing effect, certainly in real terms, for housing management teams.
No, that's a good point. Amanda, is there anything that you've sort of seen on more kind of the board level or the senior level about their thoughts and opinions against what the frontline are perhaps saying?
You know, margins continue to be really squeezed. You know, if you look at what's got to be delivered, the balance of investing in new homes, maintaining existing homes, and improving services, and that's without then layering in, you know, backlogs of remedial building safety work and all of those things. There is no question that the discussion sat around board tables and exec tables now is about how do we balance, how do we trade off, how do we do more with less. It's definitely less polarised and binary than it has been in the past, you know, digital or non-digital, digitally excluded, digitally included. It's now much more around what's optimal. You know, what's optimal? How far can I push on funding? How far can I push on investing in an area to drive an improvement that I'm going to see in 2 or 3 years? So I think nuance would be the absolute buzzword for what I'm hearing around exec and board tables, and particularly at business planning time of year. I mean, we were blown away, weren't we, John, last year with the How Smart Business Planning Boost, how much demand there was for that. You know, people were saying, great, you know, you're showing me this data that's helping me make those decisions in real time. And I think it's going to continue to be challenging. I think people talk about, you know, we're in this window of squeezed capacity. I first joined the housing sector in 2010 in the years of austerity, and we had the rent cut and you know, we thought everything was doomed, and it was definitely a really challenging period. But I think we have to accept our new normal is going to maintain this tight economic headwind position. I don't think that's going to change. So boards and exec teams need to just wake up to that reality and not wait for things to get better, because it's actually in the gift of those leaders to make it better.
Yeah, do you think it's something that needs to be communicated? Obviously not directly with tenants to say that budgets are being squeezed, but should there be more open communication about what a landlord is going to do compared to other services?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me started. It's a bit of a hobby horse of mine about transparent communication with tenants and residents. But I don't think you're ever going to win a sentiment argument when you're a big organisation talking to tenants about we can't do stuff because we haven't got any money, because the reality is there is money in the system, there is capacity, and you know, we do have the ability to do things. But I think what we do need to do is articulate more clearly what's possible. I think we need to articulate more clearly what's not possible. People talk quite a lot to me about you said we did. Well, sometimes you have to go, you said we did, and you said and we didn't, and this is why we didn't. So I think it's that context. I think it's that context behind the decision making, and that context behind maybe why some things don't happen as quickly as people would perceive. Because, you know, you can see, I run a lot of sessions with tenant groups, and, you know, they go, well, it's really common sense to just do X, Y, Z. Why haven't you done it? And you know what? That is actually quite difficult to argue with, because there's a whole myriad of reasons why. But we do have to somehow unpick that complexity, you know, and I know you do a lot of work, John, on service improvement, and it is sometimes about unpicking complexity, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one of the examples that I've come across recently is is about service charges and how those are calculated, and how it's often leaseholders, I guess, are sort of looking at a service charge that comes through and saying, well, I know I can get my tradie mate to do that much cheaper than what you're charging me, but they're not sort of looking at it holistically, and it's quite difficult to get that message across why it's necessarily that expensive, and why the landlord is not out to kind of profiteer from what the leaseholders and tenants are paying as part of their service charge.
And that is, again, that transparent communication, isn't it? I mean, you know, again, the link between GIS systems and, you know, mapping out where the piece of grass is, and, you know, I haven't got kids, these 3 people have, they play on the grass, I don't use that grass, but I'm paying to maintain it. I mean, it's quite an emotive thing, service charges, isn't it? But anyway, we're digressing. Sorry, Ali. Yeah.
No, that's fine. And it's something we covered anyway as in one of our previous reports. And it was a case study, actually, when you mentioned about the GIS mapping. And actually, like you say, it makes such a big difference, because what we found was the landlord that was doing it, people were being charged for green areas that were nowhere near their property originally. And then some people were being undercharged, and it was a case of their service charges increased. But because they had that open communication to say, look, this is what it is, this is why, people are accepting of it. You can give not bad news but negative news as long as there's an explanation, as you say, behind it, without just sort of a blanket no or a blanket yes, this is happening. Everyone's adults.
Back to nuance again. I told you nuance was the buzzword.
We shall definitely be using that. Going back to looking at what's coming up in the future with regulation, we've got the second part of Awaab's law coming in October time, we assume it's October time, as well as Decent Homes 2. Is the data from what's happened just in the last 12 months going to help us look at what's going to be happening with that coming in, or is there going to be something else?
I'm a bit concerned. I've just done one of our forum events this morning, talking at that, and there were quite a few landlords on the call that said, I'm pretty worried. pretty worried about phase 2 of Awaab's law coming in. We've only just got to grips with the kind of damper mould elements of phase 1. We're not even quite sure that we've got all the things in place to look at the full range of emergency hazards that have come in with phase 1. So there's issues there. There's also issues with building safety regulators for landlords with high risk buildings, so high-rise blocks of flats. Lots of regulation to get to grips with there. I mean, decent homes too, I think, and it goes back to your reactive comment earlier, is that's kind of one for the long finger, as the repairs manager I used to work with would say. It's just something that they can't think about. They think, well, I've got to, like, I don't know, 2040 or something to think about that. I suppose it's a bit like energy efficiency measures brought in to improve the stock. It's just something that's they know is happening in the future, but it's not going to come in immediately. But phase 2 of Awaab's law is a pretty hot topic at the moment. And something else that's come out this week is sort of flipping it around a bit, and it goes back to what Amanda was saying about the squeezed margins as well. So we've seen the new VFM metrics calculations come out for this week, and something that has changed, and this will have a material impact, I think, is that landlords will be able to include grant money, will be able to offset their major repairs expenditure, their capitalised repairs expenditure with grant money. And so that will improve this situation where we're seeing so many landlords with less than 100% of interest cover payments for the year. So I'm expecting that to kind of improve over the next year, and it won't look so stark in terms of some of these big landlords looking like they're not financially viable. That said, that's not going to affect things like the social housing cost per unit, which we're expecting to rise again, probably rise in real terms, as well as margins. And it may just have to get to what you were saying, Amanda, about a new normal. You just expect margins to be less than 20%, but somewhere between 10 and 20%, as opposed to being sort of 25%. And it's just the way you are. You've got to spend more of your surplus maintaining homes and just keeping things ticking over.
And then you're into that tipping point, which is again back to board and exec decision making, because you're then back to that tipping point of, well, what's that going to do for my rating? What's that going to do for my cost of borrowing? What's that? How do I build my relationship with the New Homes England regional structure so that I can access funding? So it's again back to this much more multifaceted, nuanced picture, and I think that's why we're seeing an increase in the sector in partnership working. We're seeing an increase in consolidation and stock swaps and stock optimization programs, and we're definitely seeing a significant increase in mergers for those kind of small to medium-sized organisations where they just can't hit a really effective operating margin without that scale, which is also then helping, of course, attract funding because we can increase development, regeneration. I think this is a new era of partnership working, and I think the things we're seeing, on the policy front, like the new approach from Homes England, for example, is a big part of that. And I think that's set to continue. It's not just doing my bit in my way, in my organisation. It's lifting your head out, looking at the regional picture. Even if you're not in the market for merger, you should certainly be having conversations about how you partner, how you cost share, and we've got some great examples in the sector of those.
No, definitely, and I think, as you say, when the people can do it, the sector's so good at and willing to kind of help each other and share information. It's just having that time and that ability to actually go, look, this is what we're doing, this is how we can do it. I was thinking the same as you were saying it about the mergers, and there's this concern about, I suppose it's the mega mergers, isn't it, that are actually probably taking all of the localism out of what they're doing, but they're being done because I suppose people are looking at it going, we see no other way forward, this works best financially, this is what we need to do. But then the impact could be not catastrophic, but could be poor on service, and it's whether the satisfaction then is going to be weaker because of what they're losing with that mega merger.
I think it's interesting you say that, because I think if you look at the really large organisations now that have grown through merger, they are, from a service design perspective, are operating with quite localised structures, because I think even the larger players are recognising the value of that local approach. So you can drive those economies of scale and still have a localised delivery model with obviously some elements centralised, because I know it's very provocative talking about size matters, and I remember years ago, I think it was like 2011 or 2012, we did a report on does size matter, and the reality is, of course, if you've got scale, there are economies of scale to be leveraged, but size doesn't automatically mean better, as you've seen, John, in the data. Sometimes larger organisations, have weaker performance and weaker data, not always, but the key is to ensure that scale is leveraged in a cost-effective way, but also in a service delivery effective way.
No, definitely. And as you say, it's that understanding, isn't it, that it's people's homes, it's people's lives. It's not just like a different corporate entity that can say we're operating outside of it because we can, because it has that individual impact, and something that we're seeing so much more with tenants and mental health and things as well. What's your thoughts and feelings, both of you, slightly off topic, but I suppose in the development of looking at the digital and the AI, how can that be perhaps coming forward help the sector? Bit of a slightly off topic there, but I guess just going into what we've got coming up in the future with what we'll be doing with next gen and things.
It's more about thinking of AI as just something that's there. It's like saying, hey, how are computers going to help you? Well, they just will. So AI, it just will help you, but you don't know exactly how until you've kind of got to grips with it and you've got the imagination to think, oh, well, this aspect or this agent or this particular tool that uses AI can help me do this particular task. So I think quite a lot of the examples that we're hearing about at the moment are kind of entry level, but I think as more learning kind of comes in and is adapted from other industries, we'll be able to see how that has a genuine impact. It's difficult to know at this stage how AI can replace that human interaction that's so important in social housing. I'm not quite sure where that comes in. I don't think people are going to be wanting to deal with humanoids. You've seen that chatbots, I think there was a survey that said like 1% of social housing tenants prefer to use a chatbot as their form of communication with the landlord. So I don't think it's going to take over that aspect of it. But there's certainly a lot of back office activities that could be improved with AI. So looking at things like service charges, rent accounting, data collection, data storage, and thinking about how that all is all brought together, and then how you can report on it. There's lots of opportunities for AI to be adopted, but you need somebody that knows the business as well as somebody that knows the technology to be able to bring those two together.
Really valid point.
And I think that I think the key is how AI and digital is used as an enabler. So you have to start with knowing your tenant base and understanding your asset and your stock profile. So you start with that real good quality data, which leads to a good quality understanding. What you then have to have is a varied multi-channel offer that incorporates data, that incorporates technology, that incorporates digital channels, and then you are genuinely meeting tenants' needs and preferences. Now, on the AI front, I think, if you look at what Housemarque are doing at the moment, for example, if we can start to use AI to predict, if we can start to use AI as an early warning system, if we can start to use AI to visualise and point certain job roles in a certain direction by taking all that really valuable data and insight, for example, that Housemarque have got, that's where the real power will be. Because when you take data and you connect it to workflow automation, you're doing things quickly, you're getting to the nub of the issues quicker, people are getting a better service. So it's how we use it as enablers, I think, that's really powerful. And I know that's where Housemarque are going next. I mean, even in the new data offer this year, the visual dashboards and that, it's all improving, it's all stronger, but AI can take that to a whole new level. And a recent piece of research that was done said that it's just going to be one of the top skills that all execs have to have by 2030. So this isn't something that you can hire the techie to do. This is something where everybody's got to be literate, got to get with the programme. And John's right, there's a lot of experimentation at the moment, isn't there? And it's back to this not being, it's not binary. It's not binary. It all needs incorporating into the way that we work. And I think it's really exciting where Housemarque are going with that.
No, certainly, as you say, it's something that it's nothing to be worried about as per se, but it's something that has to kind of grow with us and develop with us and everyone else in the sector. And I guess it's maybe the tenants' expectations balanced against what they feel other industries do with it to make it quicker for them, but it's a different service that we have to offer in the sector to them for their homes and things.
Because why do we? I mean, just out of interest, Ali. I mean, why do we act like tenants aren't consumers? I do understand that they don't have a choice, but at 9 o'clock in the morning they can be doing something on Amazon, and then at 10 o'clock they can be, doing something digitally, with a service provider on utilities or something like that, and then at 11 o'clock we think they don't want to deal with us like that. I mean, of course they do, but this is back to knowing your tenants. Because not everybody does want to, and some people want to do different types of transactions in different ways at different times. So I couldn't say, right, Ali prefers, WhatsApp, because you might prefer WhatsApp, Ali, for some things, a family chat or whatever, but you might prefer a chat with somebody else, and you might prefer, a digital AI-enabled platform for something else. And it depends on what the issue is, doesn't it?
It's almost like, I suppose, the housing sector has got all these different parts to cover, whereas everyone else in the different industries, they've got that one specific focus, but actually, no, you've got to deal with all aspects of a person's life, whether it's to do with their work, which they might be affected, by what they do. Obviously, rent is affected, how their property is, their ability to sleep in it, is it safe, do they feel safe? It all affects so many more things, whereas when you just speak to an energy provider or you just speak to Sky about how much they're charging you, it's very different from the service that you're then getting from a landlord as well.
And I think, didn't you find that, John, in some in some research, maybe like about this earlier this year or last year, where people were quite happy to pay their rent digitally, but then if they had an issue with a repair, they wanted to talk to someone about it and feel the empathy.
That's it. So it's that reassurance that you get from that interaction with a human that, yes, I've taken this on board. Yes, I understand what the problem is, and yes, I can get that sorted for you. Whereas when you're dealing with someone digitally or looking at it, you're never quite sure.
Yeah, good. But that is where connecting it to the workflow happens, because often when a human takes it, if it's not connected to the other departments who need to resolve it, that's when you end up with these really complex complaints and service failures. So I think the connection of kind of human, digital, workflow, automation, AI enabled, that's definitely the sweet spot. And it's great that Housemarque are going to be part of helping people get there with that.
No, definitely. And I suppose it's not so much database, but is there anything that you think going forward in the future that landlords need to be thinking about for their staff? Is there anything that we can kind of almost pinpoint saying, actually, this is going to have to be higher trained or more specialised or more specific? Is there anything that maybe people in the sector, they're great with empathy, they're great people because they're the frontline services, but is there things that we're going to have to start being picked up more, do you think, training wise? Either of you can answer that. I'm not just looking at you there for the data, John, but is there anything in particular you can think of?
I mean, yes. I mean, the requirement to record accurate data, I mean, all of this, AI and the service that landlords provide, it rests on having that good quality data. So that requires the person who is actually, punching the details into a PDA or whatever to know what they've got to do and why they're doing it and why they have to do it in a certain way. And that is a crucial skill, being able to kind of complete that in real time whilst or immediately after talking to a tenant about whatever the issue is, and then having that in a framework that you can readily access, a kind of single system that does management and maintenance as well, with everyone kind of understanding why they're doing it, and so that they're not just kind of putting rubbish in because the field's wrong or it doesn't quite make sense to them. That is a crucial skill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think again, I was talking earlier about this kind of top skills to 2030, and there are new roles, aren't there? I mean, prompt engineers, and you've got to be asking the right questions to use the tools effectively, but you've also got to understand the context. I think there's a real opportunity to upskill and cross skill maybe people who've done historically different roles, particularly in communities where there's maybe industrial or economic decline. I think landlords play a really vital role in helping to reskill some of those communities, mm-hmm. particularly communities where there's significant investment. So, I was at UK Reef last week, was it, or the week before I think, and we were talking about the offshore wind investment in the North Sea. Well, people who live in that community may not have the right skills to work in that sector, but they're there and they're available for work, so we need to make sure they've got those skills, So I think it's that. I think you've got to step back and look holistically at skills, and I think exec teams and boards need to succession plan on that basis. What's my organisation going to look like in 2030? Have I got the skills? Have I got the succession plan? What training do I need to be doing? And thinking about it now, not waiting for it to come and bite them on the ankle. Yeah,
no, it's a really, really good, interesting point there. Just, I suppose, moving on to the next thing. Is there 3 things that you would want to see happen over, I'd say the next 12 months, but maybe looking a little bit further into the future, that you think, either based on what we've learned from what's happened recently or over the last few years, what's 3 things that really should happen? Not necessarily will happen, but what do you think should happen going forward?
Go on, John, you go first. Yeah. Okay, well, I promise I won't have the same 3, yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see more investment in housing management services, because I think that aspect of what landlords do has been kind of pushed aside slightly because of the need to invest in buildings. So now it's the turn for landlords to invest in the people, both the people that are going out there delivering the service to tenants, but also the kind of infrastructure that they exist in as well. Number 2 is the dual ambition. I'd like to see landlords get their heads around how they can meet that dual ambition of being a good landlord as well as delivering new homes for the social housing sector. So it's about getting your head around the finance and the planning aspects of it, as well as what happens once you've built those new homes, the handover, dealing with the defects periods, making sure that the tenants moving into their new homes are able to build communities. And then with number 3, it's about the kind of policy environment. So we know that the current Labour government is minded to kind of push things in the right direction for the sector. It's kind of been a friend to the sector as long as the sector can deliver on the new homes. But it's where does that look like going forward? So you're talking about 2030, that's in the new parliament, where's that going? Who's going to be the next government? Are we going to see Nigel Farage as our next Prime Minister, for example? What's that going to look like? What does that mean? How can landlords prepare for that eventuality?
Okay. Amanda?
And I think for my 3, I mean, the first one we've already touched on, but it's very much about that, how you future-proof the organisation. So, start thinking about that future organisation now. What are margins going to look like? What are service demands going to look like? What will consumers want in 2030 and beyond, which, is not that far away, is it? I mean, I think, so that first one is that really planning ahead, really stepping back and thinking about what kind of organisation am I going to be running? What kind of characteristics is it going to have? And what are my tenants and customers going to want to see from me? So that's the first one. I think the second one is this point around start by accepting that the current complexity and economic challenges will remain. So don't go, if I just knuckle down for 2 years, I'll be fine. I mean, to be fair, a lot of current landlord business plans do look a bit better into the later years of business plan cycles at the moment. That largely to do with stock investment profiling on existing stock. However, those economic challenges are going to remain. You know, we know that global macro political landscape is challenging, and I don't think there's any indication that that's going to kind of ease off. We know that we've got cost inflation, and I think we've got to start with accepting that is our new normal. Stop complaining about it and actually get on with thinking, right, this is what I'm working with now, working on tighter margins, working on higher cost of borrowing. We do have some good news in that mix, of course, because we do have greater certainty for now on the policy front in terms of rent certainty, etc. So I think that's the second one. And then the third one for me is around context. I still see a lot of siloed working in the sector. I don't see coherent, connected, multifunctional plans that will deliver business strategies. I see the technology roadmap. I see the finance and treasury plan. I see what housing management are trying to achieve. What I don't see is here is my connected, coherent, funded business plan and strategy. And I think we've got to get a lot better at joining the dots between different departments, because I think there's potentially even efficiency in that. So that's the third thing I'd like to see.
Thank you both for your thoughts. Really great to hear and really interesting and insightful, and hopefully something that we can reflect on in 12 months' time.
Thank you. Thanks, Ali.
Thank you for joining us today on this episode of Housing Data Talks. If you can give us a like and a follow on our YouTube channel, also head along to our LinkedIn page. We share lots of things on there for Housemarque, and as well as our website, which is housemarque.co.uk. Lots on the things we've got coming up in the future, the events we have, everything that we've released, reports, different documents, some really useful, insightful pieces on there. So if you give us a like and a follow, and also head along to housemarque.co.uk.